The sun dipped low behind the rolling hills, casting long golden rays across the sprawling acres of land that had been in David McAllister's family for 3 generations. The property was quiet, save for the soft rustling of cottonwood leaves and the distant sound of a creek bubbling through the ravine. For David, this land wasn't just dirt and grass. It was memory, legacy, and the last tangible link to his late grandfather, who had fought tooth and nail to protect it. Most people in town didn't even know where his property began or ended. It stretched so far that fences seemed pointless in some areas, blending into thickets and tree lines where only deer and coyotes roamed. But David knew every inch. He could walk blindfolded and still find the stone marker his grandfather had laid by the eastern ridge or the rusted tractor left to rest in the north pasture. To him, it was peace. To others, it was opportunity. David's quiet evening ritual was interrupted one night when he noticed something strange. At first, he thought it was just headlights from a truck passing on the county road. But when he looked closer, he saw bright floodlights piercing through the trees on the far side of his land. His brow furrowed. Nobody should be out there. He pulled on his boots and grabbed his flashlight, making the long walk toward the source of the noise. As he neared, the low rumble of engines reached his ears. Then came the metallic clang of machinery. He stopped dead in his tracks. Bulldozers on his land. The ground trembled faintly under his feet, as if the earth itself were groaning at the intrusion. David's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, his flashlight beam cutting through the dust, until he spotted the machines, a bulldozer, a backhoe, and several trucks lined up with men in neon vests unloading materials. The air reeked of diesel. He shouted, "Hey! What the hell do you think you're doing out here?" The men froze, looking up like deer caught in headlights. One of them, a foreman with a hard hat, squinted at him before shouting back, "Clearing! Ground! HOA orders!" David marched closer. "This is my land. You can't just roll in here with machines." The foreman shrugged, as though it was none of his concern. "Take it up with Karen. She signed the papers, said this area was approved for development." Karen, the name alone made David's stomach twist. Karen Whitfield, president of the Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association, had been a thorn in his side ever since her sprawling suburb crept up to the border of his property 5 years ago. She was the type who strutted around in pastel suits, sunglasses perched on her head, barking orders at anyone who'd listen. In her mind, she ran the town. But even Karen couldn't possibly think she had a right to his land. Could she? The next morning, David drove into town and marched straight to the HOA office, a polished building that looked more like a country club than a neighborhood office. Inside, he found Karen seated behind a desk, tapping away at her tablet like a queen presiding over her court. She looked up, feigning surprise. "David, what brings you here?" "You know damn well why I'm here," he snapped. "Your people had bulldozers on my property last night." Karen blinked innocently. "Oh, that?" "Yes. We've begun phase 2 of our expansion. The board voted unanimously. Those lots are scheduled for new housing." David leaned forward, his voice cold. "They're not lots. They're mine. That's McAllister land. Always has been." She tilted her head, a smirk tugging at her lips. "David, you've let that land sit untouched for decades. No crops, no livestock, nothing but weeds and coyotes. The HOA determined it was unutilized space. The community deserves better." "The community?" he repeated, incredulous. "That's not your call. You don't own a single acre past your cul-de-sac." Karen leaned back in her chair, unfazed. "We've already filed the permits. The county approved everything. You can shout all you like, but progress doesn't wait for nostalgia." David stormed out, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. Rage burned in his chest, but beneath it was a creeping sense of dread. Permits? County approval? How could they have moved this fast? He knew bureaucracy. Nothing ever happened overnight, unless someone pulled strings. That night, unable to sleep, he grabbed a lantern and walked the fence line again. This time, he saw more than just bulldozers. Stakes with neon ribbons dotted the soil, marking property lines that didn't belong to the HOA. Wooden signs already read Lot 14 and Lot 15, as if the land had already been carved into neighborhoods on paper. His stomach dropped. They weren't just trespassing. They were acting like they owned the place. 2 days later, the first letter arrived. It was folded neatly inside a crisp white envelope stamped with the Lakeside Estates HOA logo. David almost laughed when he opened it, until he read the contents. Notice of violation. Failure to maintain landscaping on community property. Fine. $1,500. He read it twice, stunned. They were fining him for not maintaining his own land. His pulse quickened. He could feel his grandfather's voice echoing in his head, the way he used to warn him about people who didn't respect boundaries. The land doesn't speak, son. You have to be its voice. David folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and set it on the kitchen counter. He knew what this meant. Karen wasn't just pushing for expansion. She was declaring war, and she had no idea who she was up against. David woke the next morning with a weight pressing against his chest. The letter from the HOA sat on his counter like a snake coiled and waiting, its neat envelope a mockery of everything it represented. He had lived on this land his entire life without ever needing approval from anyone. Now, suddenly, a group of suburban busybodies led by Karen thought they could fine him for weeds on his own soil. It wasn't just an insult, it was a challenge. That afternoon, David drove into town to the county records office, a squat brick building that smelled faintly of dust and coffee. He marched up to the clerk, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses, and slammed the letter down on the counter. "Tell me this is a mistake," David demanded. The clerk scanned the letter, his brow creasing. "HOA violations? That's not something we usually—" He stopped mid-sentence and pulled up a file on his computer. His eyes widened slightly. "Well, I'll be damned. Looks like the HOA filed a boundary adjustment last month, claimed this section of land as part of their subdivision." David's hands curled into fists. "That's impossible. I never sold a thing." The clerk leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Between you and me, something smells off. But the council stamped it approved. Once that happens, it's tough to unwind." David left the building with his head spinning. Boundary adjustment? Approval? Karen must have greased more than a few palms at the council. Money and politics. She had both on her side. But David had something stronger. He had the truth. That evening, he dug through his grandfather's old trunk in the attic. Inside, among faded photographs and brittle receipts, he found the original deed to the property, signed, notarized, and older than the HOA itself. His grandfather had kept everything. Survey maps, tax records, even letters exchanged with the county decades ago. David ran his fingers over the ink, steadying himself. They think they can paper over this? Let's see how they handle real documents. Next day, he stormed into the Lakeside Estates HOA meeting. The room was filled with homeowners sitting in neat rows, sipping bottled water, chatting about lawn regulations and community pools. At the front, Karen presided like a queen, her hair sprayed into a helmet, her pearls gleaming under the fluorescent lights. David pushed through the crowd, holding the deed high. "You're building on my land. I have proof right here." San, room quieted instantly. Karen's smile never faltered, but her eyes sharpened like daggers. "Oh, David," she said sweetly, "you must be mistaken. Those lots belong to Lakeside Estates. We have all the permits. All the permits." David slapped the papers onto the table. "This is the original deed. This land has been in my family for nearly a century. You don't own a square inch." Karen glanced at the documents without touching them, then looked back at the crowd. "Mr. McAllister is confused," she announced loudly. "We've already confirmed everything with the county. He's clinging to outdated records. That land is ours now, and the community supports this growth." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some homeowners looked uneasy, others nodded firmly. At Karen's words, David pointed a finger at her. "You can twist words all you want, but you know you're trespassing, and if you don't stop, you'll regret it." Karen's smile finally cracked into a smirk. "Then take us to court." Within a week, construction crews had multiplied. Concrete foundations were poured. Framing began on the first row of houses. It was surreal, like watching strangers invade his living room and redecorate while insisting it was theirs. Trucks thundered up and down makeshift dirt roads, and signs went up advertising new homes, starting at $350,000. David gritted his teeth every time he passed by, but he stayed silent, gathering evidence. Then came the second letter. This one wasn't just a fine. It was a warning. Failure to comply with community landscaping regulations will result in escalating fines and potential legal action. Current balance, $7,500. David almost laughed. They were fining him for their own construction mess. He hadn't set foot past the fence line in weeks, yet the HOA claimed he was responsible for every pile of dirt and half-poured sidewalk. It was clear now. This wasn't about weeds or landscaping. This was about breaking him down, forcing him to give in. Karen wasn't just building homes, she was building a case to strip him of everything. But she underestimated him. Late one night, David sat at his kitchen table, documents spread out before him. The deed, survey maps, tax receipts, every scrap of evidence proving ownership. Across from him sat his old friend Mark Reynolds, the county sheriff. "You've got them cornered, Dave," Mark said, tapping the deed. "This land is yours, clear as day. But you'll need more than papers." Karen's slick. She's got lawyers, money, and influence. "If you want to win, you've got to make this airtight." David nodded slowly. "Then I'll make it airtight. I'll let them hang themselves with their own rope." Days turned into weeks. The development grew. Frames became houses. Streets were paved. Children rode their bikes on driveways poured on his land. And then, as if fate were mocking him, a new HOA notice arrived. This one accused him of improper waste storage because construction crews had left dumpsters on his side of the fence. The fine? $25,000. David's blood boiled. They weren't just pushing, they were daring him to fight back. The following Sunday, Karen held a ribbon-cutting ceremony for the first row of homes. Balloons bobbed in the breeze, a marching band played, and local news cameras rolled as she cut the ribbon with oversized scissors, beaming like a celebrity. David stood at the edge of the crowd, arms folded, watching. He recorded every word, every boast she made about expanding the community and reclaiming wasted land. In that moment, he realized something. Karen wasn't hiding what she was doing. She was flaunting it. That arrogance would be her downfall. As the applause echoed and the cameras flashed, David quietly slipped away, clutching his phone. The war wasn't coming. It had already begun. David sat in the dim light of his study, the quiet hum of the ceiling fan, the only sound. The stack of HOA letters lay scattered across his desk like a collection of threats from a petty tyrant. Each one was more absurd than the last. Fines for weeds, for construction debris, even for failure to comply with community aesthetics. It would have been laughable if it weren't so dangerous. Karen wasn't just testing him. She was orchestrating a hostile takeover, brick by brick, law by law. That night, David pulled the heavy oak trunk closer, the one his grandfather had left him. The air smelled faintly of cedar and dust when he pried it open. Inside were layers of history, black and white photographs, yellowed letters, hunting licenses, and, most importantly, documents tied to the land. He carefully unfolded one thick, brittle paper, the original deed. It was written in neat cursive ink, bearing his grandfather's name and the county seal. But what struck him most was the attached survey. The boundaries were crystal clear, stretching far beyond where the HOA's new home stood. No gray area, no ambiguity. The land was his. Tucked deeper in the trunk, David found something even better. An updated survey map from 20 years ago, notarized and recorded with the county. The HOA's so-called boundary adjustment was nothing but smoke and mirrors compared to this ironclad record. A smile crept onto his face for the first time in weeks. Karen thought he was an old fool clinging to nostalgia. But what he held in his hands was a legal weapon sharp enough to cut her empire to pieces. The next morning, David drove to Mark Reynolds's office. The sheriff greeted him with a firm handshake, his weathered face betraying curiosity. "You look like a man who just found a loaded gun," Mark said, motioning for him to sit. David spread the documents across the desk. "These are the deeds, surveys, tax receipts, everything. My family's owned this land since before Lakeside Estates was a cornfield. Karen's entire development is built on lies." Mark examined the papers carefully, his eyes narrowing. "This is airtight, Dave. Any judge worth his robe will side with you." He tapped the latest HOA fine. "But you've got to play this smart. Don't just wave these in Karen's face. Let her dig herself deeper. The more she builds, the harder the fall." David leaned back, exhaling slowly. "So I wait." "Exactly," Mark said. "Document everything. Record her words. Keep every letter. When this hits court, we'll bury her under the weight of her own arrogance." Over the next few weeks, David did just that. He walked his property every evening with a camera, recording the machines digging deeper, the workers pouring driveways, the families moving into homes that didn't belong to them. He filmed the signs going up, for sale placards boasting HOA-approved luxury homes, and he saved every letter Karen mailed. By now, the fines totaled over $50,000, an absurd mountain of debt she claimed he owed for non-compliance. Each notice became another brick in the wall of evidence he was building. Karen, meanwhile, grew bolder. One afternoon, she pulled up to David's driveway in a shiny white SUV, stepping out in high heels that sank slightly into the gravel. Her sunglasses glinted in the sun as she strutted toward him. "David," she said sweetly, "I thought I'd give you one last chance. You can either sign this agreement," she handed him a thick folder, "or you can keep racking up fines until you're bankrupt. The choice is yours." David didn't take the folder. "What's in it?" "Simple. Karen said, smiling. A transfer of property rights. You sell us the unused land for a fair price, and we wipe your fines clean. Everyone wins. David let out a sharp laugh. Fair price? You mean a fraction of what it's worth? And those fines? They're as fake as your authority. Karen's smile faltered. You're making this harder than it needs to be. We've already got buyers lined up. Do you really want to drag this through court? You'll lose, David. The HOA has lawyers, money, and the council on its side. David met her gaze, calm and steady. Then I guess I'll see you in court. For the first time, Karen's composure cracked. A flash of irritation passed through her eyes before she quickly masked it with another smirk. Suit yourself, she said, turning back to her SUV. But don't say I didn't warn you. Warn you. Word spread quickly after that. Neighbors whispered about David's stubbornness, fueled by Karen's gossip. She painted him as a bitter old man trying to sabotage progress, someone who couldn't accept change. But David didn't care. He knew the truth. And soon, so would everyone else. The breaking point came 3 weeks later. A letter arrived, not just another fine, but a notice of intent to seize property. The HOA claimed his outstanding balance of $75,000 gave them the right to file a lien against his land. David stared at the letter, his jaw tightening. This wasn't a bluff anymore. This was Karen's full offensive. That night, he drove into the city to meet with an attorney Mark had recommended, a sharp young lawyer named Emily Carter. She listened carefully as David laid out the documents, the fines, the footage, and the letters. When he finished, Emily leaned back in her chair, eyebrows raised. Mr. McAllister, this isn't just a property dispute. This is fraud, plain and simple. And if we play this right, we won't just stop them. We'll own them. David's lips curled into a grim smile. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. The lawsuit was filed 2 days later. Karen scoffed publicly, telling homeowners it was nothing more than a desperate stunt. She boasted about her legal team and assured everyone the HOA would crush the challenge. But David stayed, silent. He let her talk. He let her boast. And with every house built, every driveway paved, every family moved in, she tightened the noose around her own neck. The court date was set. David sat at his kitchen table the night before the hearing, staring at the stack of documents Emily had prepared. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind once again. The land doesn't speak, son. You have to be its voice. Tomorrow, he would be. And when the truth came out, Karen would learn that her empire of arrogance was built on sand. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, its marble floors echoing with each step as David entered. He wore his best suit, one that hadn't left the closet since his daughter's wedding, and though it felt stiff on his shoulders, he walked tall. This wasn't just a hearing. This was a reckoning. Emily Carter, his attorney, met him at the ivy door with a reassuring nod. We've got this, David. You've got the deed, the surveys, and the video evidence. Just stay calm. David gave a small smile. Calm is all I've got left. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with chatter. Reporters had shown up, drawn by whispers of a scandal involving one of the town's wealthiest HOAs. Homeowners packed the benches, their faces anxious, some curious, others smug with loyalty to Karen. And then she appeared. Karen swept into the room like a queen attending her coronation. She wore a tailored red suit, pearls gleaming at her neck, and a smile plastered so firmly it looked painted on. Flanking her were 2 attorneys in expensive suits, their briefcases polished enough to see reflections in. She caught sight of David and smirked. "Ready to lose your land, farmer?" she whispered as she passed. David didn't answer. He simply sat, hands folded, the weight of his grandfather's deed resting in Emily's briefcase beside him. The judge, an older man with sharp eyes, entered and called the case to order. Case number 3827, McAllister versus Lakeside Estates, Homeowners Association. Karen's attorney stood first, a tall man named Pierce with a voice like syrup. "Your Honor, this case is frivolous. The HOA lawfully obtained permits and approvals for development. Mr. McAllister's claims rely on outdated paperwork and a misunderstanding of property lines." He gestured toward David with mock sympathy. "My client, Mrs. Whitfield, has done nothing but act in the best interests of the community." Karen smiled at the judge, as if she were running for office. Emily rose slowly, adjusting her blazer. "Your Honor, opposing counsel is correct about one thing. This case is about paperwork, but not outdated paperwork. Legally binding deeds, surveys, and tax records spanning nearly a century, all proving, without a shadow of a doubt, that every inch of land these homes sit on belongs to my client, Mr. McAllister." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Emily laid the first document on the evidence table. The original deed, yellowed but clear, signed and notarized decades ago. Next came the survey maps, each one marked with county seals, all aligning perfectly with David's current boundaries. She spoke firmly. "Not once in all those years has the land been transferred, sold, or relinquished. Mr. McAllister has paid taxes faithfully, maintained boundaries, and fulfilled every obligation of ownership. The HOA's so-called boundary adjustment was not only fraudulent. It was impossible." The judge leaned forward, studying the documents. His brow furrowed. Karen shifted uncomfortably, but her lawyer pressed on. "Objection, Your Honor. The county approved our permits. The council recognized the boundary adjustment. That alone establishes legitimacy." Emily turned sharply. "Objection to the objection. The county council can't override legal ownership. Fraudulent paperwork does not erase a deed." The judge nodded slowly. "Councilor Carter is correct. Ownership cannot be transferred by council vote. Proceed." Karen's mask cracked. She leaned toward her lawyer, whispering furiously. David couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. Her body language screamed desperation. Emily pressed the advantage. "We also submit into evidence communications obtained during discovery. Emails between Mrs. Whitfield and council members." She held up printed copies, the text highlighted. "In these emails, Mrs. Whitfield acknowledges uncertainty about the property lines, yet instructs the council to push it through anyway, because, and I quote, McAllister is too old and stubborn to fight back." Gasps filled the room. Karen's face drained of color. She shook her head violently. "Those are taken out of context." But Emily wasn't finished. She pulled out a USB drive. "We also have video evidence. At a ribbon-cutting ceremony, Mrs. Whitfield stated on record that they were reclaiming wasted land, and when questioned, she admitted Mr. McAllister never agreed to sell. She bragged about moving forward despite objections. This was broadcast publicly. We have the footage." The judge's expression hardened. "Play the clip." On the courtroom monitor, Karen appeared, microphone in hand, smiling broadly as she cut a ribbon. Her voice echoed, "This land sat useless for years, but we, the HOA, took it back for the community. McAllister can shout all he wants, but progress doesn't wait for nostalgia." When the video ended, the silence was deafening. David sat quietly, his heart pounding. Every word was true, every document real. For weeks, He had feared this moment, but now it was clear. Karen had built her empire on arrogance and lies. The judge removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Mrs. Whitfield, do you deny making these statements?" Karen stammered. I was misled by my advisors. I believed the land was under HOA authority." "This isn't my fault," her lawyer interjected. "Your Honor, surely this is a misunderstanding." The judge raised a hand. "Enough. The evidence is overwhelming. This court recognizes David McAllister as the lawful owner of the disputed property. Every home built under the HOA's direction rests on land that does not belong to them." The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Some homeowners covered their mouths in shock. Others glared at Karen, realizing they had been duped. Karen sank into her chair, eyes wide, face pale. For the first time, she looked small. But the judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, this court finds Mrs. Whitfield and the Lakeside Estates HOA guilty of fraudulent misrepresentation. Remedies will be determined in the next session. But let it be known, the deeds stand. Mr. McAllister owns every inch of that land." His gavel slammed down with a sharp crack that echoed through the chamber. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Reporters scrambled for quotes. Homeowners shouted questions, some demanding refunds, others panicking about their mortgages. Karen's lawyers tried to usher her out, but she sat frozen, her empire crumbling around her. David remained still. He didn't gloat, didn't smirk. He simply closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. His grandfather's words whispered through his mind once more. "The land doesn't speak, son. You have to be its voice." Today, he had been its voice. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and polished oak. Sunlight streamed in through the tall windows, cutting across the room in sharp beams. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands clasped tightly, feeling the rough calluses from years of working the land. Across from me, Karen sat with her attorneys, 3 of them, each in pressed suits. Her lips pursed, her face tight with the same arrogant confidence she had worn since the very beginning. The room was packed. Reporters sat along the back rows, townsfolk crammed into the gallery, whispering about the spectacle. It wasn't every day that a homeowners association was dragged into federal court by one of the very people they claimed to govern. The judge, a tall man with a stern jawline and deep-set eyes, entered the room. Everyone stood, and the gavel cracked like thunder against the block. "This court is now in session," he announced. "We are here to hear the case of John Mason versus Willow Creek Homeowners Association." Karen's lawyers were first to speak. They argued with practiced precision, painting me as a bitter old man who failed to adapt to progress. They claimed the HOA had every right to enforce community development, citing endless contracts, signatures, and supposed bylaws. Karen's smug expression never wavered. She glanced back at the gallery now and then, almost relishing the attention. To her, this wasn't about justice. It was about power, about crushing anyone who dared to stand in her way. Then it was my turn. My lawyer, a sharp-minded local named Rachel Pierce, stood tall in her navy suit and began to unravel the HOA's web of lies. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she said, her voice firm, "this is not a case about community guidelines. This is not about whether a fence is too high or whether a lawn is properly mowed. This is about theft, about arrogance, and about one woman's belief that she could take what was never hers to begin with." She motioned for me to take the stand. My boots echoed against the hardwood floor as I walked forward, every step heavy with memory. When I sat down, thy body. Bailiff swore me in, and Rachel began her questions. Mr. Mason, can you explain to the court your connection to the property in question? I nodded. That land has been in my family for over a century. My grandfather cleared those fields with his own hands. My father planted orchards there. I've spent my life tending that soil. Every inch of it, every acre, belongs to me. Rachel presented the old deeds, yellowed with age, signed and notarized decades before the HOA even existed. Then she revealed the newest certified documents recorded at the county office, leaving no room for doubt. But the moment that silenced the room came when Rachel projected a map onto the courtroom screen. It was the survey, done just weeks before the trial. The bold red outline traced the property lines with precision, cutting right through the shiny new subdivision Karen had built. Every home, every driveway, every streetlight, all of it sat squarely on my land. The jurors leaned forward. The judge adjusted his glasses. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her confident smile flickering for the first time. When it came time for cross-examination, Karen's lawyers tried to rattle me. They asked if I'd ever considered donating the land for the good of the community. They accused me of being selfish, of standing in the way of progress. I looked straight at them and said, "Progress doesn't mean stealing from your neighbor. Progress doesn't mean erasing a family's history just because you think you can make a profit. That land is mine, and no one, especially not an HOA, has the right to take it from me." The gallery erupted in murmurs. Even the judge allowed the moment to hang in the air before calling for order. Then came the final blow. Rachel called Karen herself to the stand. Karen's heels clicked sharply as she approached, her posture rigid, her expression still defiant. But under Rachel's steady questioning, cracks began to show. "Mrs. Langley," Rachel began, "did you, at any point, obtain written permission from Mr. Mason to build on his land?" Karen hesitated. "We believed we had the authority through community vote." "That wasn't the question," Rachel pressed. "Did you have permission from the owner of the property, Mr. Mason?" Karen's lips tightened. "No," the jury scribbled notes furiously. "And were you aware of Mr. Mason's ownership prior to construction?" Karen's eyes darted. "We assumed the land was unclaimed." Rachel slammed a copy of the deed onto the witness stand. "This deed was on file, publicly accessible, and valid. You didn't assume. You ignored it." The room gasped. Karen's face flushed red, her arrogance melting into panic. By the time closing arguments came, the outcome was clear. Rachel's voice rang with conviction as she stood before the jury. "This case is about more than property lines. It is about the belief that power can override truth. But today, you have the chance to send a message that no one, not even a so-called HOA president, is above the law." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman handed the verdict to the judge. "In the matter of John Mason versus Willow Creek Homeowners Association, we, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Mason." The judge's voice carried across the room like a final bell. "The HOA is ordered to vacate the property immediately. Damages are awarded to Mr. Mason in the amount of $12 million. Furthermore, construction on the disputed land is deemed unlawful and must be dismantled under county supervision." Karen gasped audibly, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashed, and the gallery erupted in cheers. I sat back, a wave of relief washing over me. Justice had been served, not just for me, but for every person who had ever been bullied by someone who thought their title gave them the right to trample others. Karen was escorted out of the courtroom, her head down for the first time since I'd met her. No smugness, no control, just the hollow realization that her empire had crumbled. When I walked outside, the sun was bright, and the air smelled of fresh earth. Neighbors, friends, even strangers patted me on the back, shaking my hand. Reporters shouted questions, cameras clicked. But all I felt was the quiet satisfaction of knowing the land was safe. That evening, I drove out to the ridge where my grandfather once stood. The subdivision looked strangely quiet now, its rows of identical houses shadowed by uncertainty. Soon, they'd be gone, and the fields would return to what they were meant to be: wide, open, and free. I knelt, pressed my palm into the soil, and whispered, "We did it, Grandpa. We kept it ours." For the first time in months, I smiled without weight on my chest. The fight was over. Justice had found its way home.